Okay. In there. You called a little while ago. Yes, sir. Go ahead. Just not that sheet, the other one on the no, on the other tape. Yes. Okay. Our apologies. We're trying to get this together here. Okay. Um, huh. Yes, you do.
This meeting is being recorded.
All right. Okay, good deal. Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you all for joining us for today's A Month of Service presentation of title fraud and deed scams and scam prevention. My name is Nia Murray. I am the programs coordinator with Neighborhood Recovery Community Development Corporation, and we are one of the partners in the A Month of Service collaboration. Also included in the partnership, we have the City of Houston's Department of Neighborhoods, and joining us, we have Miss Cecile Carlson, who will be logging in just a moment. In addition to that, included in our partnership, we have Lone Star Legal Aid, the Earl Carl Institute, Texas Legal Services Center, Houston Volunteer Lawyers, Harris Central Appraisal District, and the Harris County Tax Assessor Collector's Office. And together we make up A Month of Service. And basically, A Month of Service is the collaboration of all of our organizations coming together on a monthly basis and offering a variety of different workshops, resources, and information to the communities that we all serve relative to asset protection, asset building, community empowerment, and the maintaining of generational wealth. We started this collaboration quite a few years ago in an attempt to reach more people in the different communities that we all serve, to get as much information out to the community as we possibly can, and to create a larger impact. We know that there are a lot of folks that are out there that don't have access to a lot of information, access to a lot of different resources. So that again, we want to try to get as much information out to the community as we possibly can. So we decided to pool all of our initiatives together. And we used to go out into different communities throughout the city and host a month-long set of workshops in that particular community. We would go to another community and then do the same thing again there, which is how we kind of came up with A Month of Service. But that, due to the pandemic, we did have to convert to the virtual platform. Um, this has kind of been a blessing and a curse at the same time, that we've been able to reach even more people throughout the entire city and surrounding counties, and then even across the state of Texas, for folks that actually join in and watch all of our presentations. It has allowed us the opportunity to expand on the topic and the subjects that we actually offer. I'm still adding people into it, so I'm trying to watch the room at the same time too. So it allowed us to expand on all of our different topics. And one of the things that we have noticed that has come up that has not been addressed too much, for an issue that's impacting a lot of neighborhoods, is title fraud and deed scams. So we have our presenter on today, Ms. Cassandra McGarvey, with McGarvey PLLC, who's going to be providing the information for you all today about title fraud, what it is, how it happens, the different scams that are out there, what are deeds, and, what are the different types of deeds that are filed, and potentially what measures can be taken to help with preventing these types of scams and frauds from actually happening. Note that the information that we do present here today is for educational purposes only. None of the information is to be considered legal advice. However, we do encourage you to reach out to legal service partners or law offices like Ms. McGarvey's if you find yourselves in need of any civil legal assistance or in anything in relation to title fraud or deed scam, for any kind of help that we could possibly give you. So we do record this session So a link of the recording will be sent out to everyone that has registered for today. We also do broadcast live on our social media platform. We are streaming on our YouTube channel, and it will be shared on our Facebook and Instagram. So again, this is your opportunity to ask whatever questions that it is that you have for this volunteer professional for today, mind you. She did take the time out of her day, out of her practice to provide this information to the community. But we do ask that you try to keep your questions to be as general as you possibly can. We don't want you to divulge any personal, specific, detailed information about your own particular case, as this is a public forum, public setting. So we don't want your personal information kind of getting out there for everybody to have access to. So do keep that in mind. You have the opportunity to either type your question into the chat and I'll read it aloud at the end. If you are joining us on our YouTube channel or on our social media platforms, I am monitoring those. So I will be asked, feel free to type those questions into the comment section as well. And then I will read those aloud at the end in addition to that. If you like, if you're more comfortable, at the end of the presentation, you can unmute yourself and ask your questions directly of the presenter as well too. But again, please keep in mind that if it's a very real specific question about your particular situation, that's something that we do not want to have addressed here, but just to try to keep it as general as you possibly can. So do keep that in mind. With that being said, we are going to move right on into our introduction and get on into what you came here to hear this afternoon. So before we get started, I'd like to do a quick introduction of Cecile Carlson with the Department of Neighborhoods, who's here trying to assist with our technical difficulties here, but I do want her to actually at least introduce herself before we get started for everyone. So without further ado, Ms. Cecile Carlson.
Hi, good afternoon, everybody. My name is Cecile Carlson. I am the Outreach Coordinator with the Department of Neighborhoods, Office of Neighborhood Engagement. I want to thank everybody for being here today. We have a full house. Really excited. Thank you for everybody who's here as well. We are working through some technical difficulties, but we'll get it started here shortly. And I appreciate also our presenter, Ms. Cassandra. Thank you so much for being here. I'm excited to learn today and get some useful information. So thank you so much.
Okay, so when we say here, we are here hosting the meeting in person as well as on Zoom. So we are at the Alice Young Neighborhood Library that's located over on Griggs Road. So we do have some folks that are here. They may have some questions for you as well, Cassandra, when we get to the end. But without further ado, let's go ahead and have you introduce yourself and get started.
Hi, thank you very much. I'm actually very excited to be here and share some of this information with you. As Nia said, my name is Cassie McGarvey. I am a real estate attorney working out of Houston, Texas, and my primary practice area is real estate. I like to say if it touches and concerns real estate, that's what I do. And in that, the main thing I handle are title disputes. And so it is not uncommon for me to see forged deeds and forged documentations and trying to understand like how these things happen. This one of those things these come across my desk every day. And so the point of me being here today is to kind of tell you what to look out for, how do you protect yourself, and what are some of those best practices that you can use so that way you do not become a victim. And one thing that I do want to lead off with is I don't want to have this presentation be something that it feels like it's inciting fear in you. Really, what I hope is that this presentation is more empowering. And so that is the goal in everything with this is I want you to have information because I feel like the more information and the more knowledge you have, the better you understand what's happening and how people are able to do these schemes. And that way you don't fall victim to that. So the first thing is I want to kind of go through some basic concepts. And actually, I just realized I need to share my screen with you guys so that way you can see what it is that I am talking about. So I apologize. There we go. Nia, can you confirm that my screen is up right now?
Yes,
Okay.
it's on the basic concepts.
Perfect. All right. So first things first, I want to walk through some very basic concepts, basic real estate terms. And the first one of these concepts is going to be the grantor in a deed. So what that means is this is the person that is typically referred to as the seller. This is the person who is giving away or selling their interest in real property. The next thing is the grantee in a deed. This is the person who is receiving the property. This is typically going to be the buyer in a transaction. And I want to add that I'm going through these terms because I've had employees at title companies get confused as to the terminology. And so it's not uncommon for people to get confused, but I just want you guys to understand so y'all aren't. So we've got grantor and deed, grantee and deed. And the next is we've got a deed and a deed of trust. So typically, whenever you are, or not typically, but whenever you're purchasing property, you are going to get a deed to that property. That deed is the document that gets recorded in the real property records, and that shows that you are the owner of that property. In contrast, a deed of trust is what we call a security instrument. So, most times, whenever you're purchasing property, most people don't have hundreds of thousands of dollars to write a check for their property. So, they get a loan. And whenever you're getting that loan, you're going to execute a couple documents. You're going to execute the promissory note, which is the contract saying that you're going to pay the note back. And then the next thing is the deed of trust. So that deed of trust is a document that says if I don't pay this note back, somebody else has the ability to come in and foreclose on the property and take that note, take the property back. And so it's the deed of trust that is securing the promissory note. So in the deed of trust, the borrower, who is also considered the buyer, is going to be the grantor in the deed of trust because that grantor, the buyer and borrower, is giving to the lender an interest in the property that says, if I don't pay, you have the right to take over the property and sell it. Now, the next thing is sometimes people will do a transaction and they say that in the deed, they are assuming a note or assuming a promissory note. Whenever you are assuming something, you are taking on an obligation to pay that item. In contrast, sometimes you'll see deeds where they are subject to something. Whenever a deed is taken or property is taken subject to an interest, that means that there's not an obligation to it. So to do anything with it. However, if you're taking it subject to a loan, and another deed of trust, know that if that interest, if that loan isn't paid, that lender still has the obligation or still has the ability to come in and foreclose, even though you don't have the obligation to pay it under your agreement. If you are closing at a title company, most of the time you will not see these types of terms. So the next thing I want to walk through is the various different types of deeds. And it's important to note that all deeds are not created equal. And the difference is what type of warranty your seller is giving to you. So let's start on the far left. This is what we call a quitclaim deed. And I will say this most often when I see somebody who tries to do a property transaction themselves, or they want to give property to a family member, 9 times out of 10, it seems like they say, I'm just going to do a quitclaim deed, or that's what happens. What a quitclaim deed is number one, it doesn't actually convey any interest in the property. All that it says is it really functions as a release of any interest that one may have. So if I quit claim my interest in a property to you, I'm not saying that I'm giving you anything. I'm just saying I'm not going to claim any interest and I'm letting you claim whatever interest that I have in that property. I'll admit we've sort of joked. I've gotten calls from people who are trying to buy property from me that I do not own. There's one particular text message that I personally receive that this person wants to buy my property on Windy Thicket Lane. I own no property on Windy Thicket Lane. But I have told the person I will sell it to you if I can do it as a quitclaim deed. And again, I'm just sort of joking around with them, trying to see if they'll to see what they'll do because I know they're kind of scammy folks anyway. Um, the next type of deed, moving one over, is a deed without warranty. This is very similar to a quitclaim deed, but it is different on one very important item, is that it is actually conveying an interest in real property, whereas the quitclaim deed does not. However, there are no warranties in this, meaning that your seller is not promising to you that they have any ownership interest in the property. The next type of deed is a special warranty deed. And in this, the seller is warranting to you that they have title to the property, that they've been given it. And so any warranty or title defect is limited to those things that would have happened within the period that the seller or grantor owned that property. And now, lastly, the broadest and most encompassing type of warranty is the general warranty deed. And in this document, the seller is telling you, as the buyer, I'm warranting that you have good title to the property all the way back to the sovereign. And what that means is all the way back to the original land grant. So all the way back to the first person who claimed private ownership interest in that property. I'm confirming and I'm warranting that you will have it, and I will help you defend that title to the property. And it's containing all of those warranties. Now, let's circle back for a minute and talk about the quitclaim deed. A few years ago, the Texas legislature instituted a new provision in the property code that says after 4 years, a quitclaim deed is basically can be relied upon as having valid title. So typically, if you have a quitclaim deed somewhere in that chain of title, title companies don't want to write a title insurance policy on this. However, this statute allows them to have some assurances in the ownership of the property. So next, I want to talk about some of the differences between forgeries and fraudulent documents. Fraud is some examples of fraud is where you're purporting to sell property that you don't own, or you're purporting to exceed the power of your authority, such as if you have a power of attorney for somebody and you don't have the right to sell that property that that person may own, but you go ahead and do it anyway. In contrast, the forgery is whenever you are signing a document or putting forth a document that is not authorized. So you're signing someone else's name to the document. And in those cases, forged deeds never pass title. They are always void and they are treated as a nullity. And the importance of that is that future people, like within the chain of title, they cannot rely on that forgery. And so the general rule is that, that forgery will vitiate everything that it touches. So it will wipe out anything that happens. So meaning if you have a fraudster that forges your name on a deed and sells your property, they sell it to person A. Then person A turns around and sells it to person B. Person B has no knowledge of what happened between the fraudster and person A, but it doesn't matter because there was a forgery involved in the chain of title, and it cannot pass title. Um, in contrast, fraudulent deeds are voidable. And in those instances, they can withstand contest because they are not voided until there is a court order invalidating them. So let's kind of talk about what it is that we're talking about whenever we talk about deed fraud. We're talking about really, I would say, the forging of signatures, the filing of fraudulent deeds, and the overall, just general taking control of somebody's property without the owner's consent. And these general methods that they're going to use are going to be identity theft, forgery, or coercion of vulnerable and impressionable homeowners. Most notably, the elderly would be where we see this the most. So what I want to do right now is kind of walk you through some red flags in these types of transactions, and also give you the power, if you are even purchasing property, to start asking some questions about the documents, the underlying documents. And whenever you're looking at it and thinking, this deal sounds too good to be true, it probably is. And so this is one of those things, like given a similar presentation, we throw up this picture. If you're familiar with Van Gogh's The Scream, which one is real? And that's knowing you have to have the knowledge of what these documents are supposed to look like and what some of these terms are supposed to be in order to start asking those questions. So let's talk about one of the things that I think is probably the most common, or one of the most common issues that we see, is coercion and undue influence. And then we need to look at, like, how do we know that this is what's happening? So I was involved in a case where we're dealing with a gentleman by the name of Percy Morgan. So Percy Morgan was a man in his late 80s, early 90s, and he was living in assisted living, or actually more accurately, a nursing home. So we've got a couple things here that I want you to note about this deed. So we've got just this general fill in the blank deed. And then here as well, I've went ahead and put it in an odd location, but we do have that this was recorded in the real property records on August 4th, 2017. So let's take a couple kind of look at these things about it. So at first blush, there's really not anything to be concerned with about this deed, at least in my mind, um, until you start digging. So you've got, it was signed in Marshall, Texas, which is Harrison County, by this notary, Jan Williams. Um, there is a little bit, if we want to go back a slide, this was recorded on August 4th, 2017, and the deed was executed on July 31st, 2017. So there's nothing really questionable about that, except you start digging in a little bit more, and we look at the next document that's filed in the real property records. And the next thing that we see for him is a general warranty deed. So what happened here in this transaction is that the seller got the deed from, or excuse me, this gentleman got the deed from Percy, but it didn't have the warranty language in it. And the title company said, we need a general warranty deed. So they went back. Here's a general warranty deed that was signed, was executed on August 8th. If you notice, the signature looks a little bit different. And then also, we've got that same notary on this. The dates are kind of odd, but also notice the first time that Percy executed this document, let's go back, He was in Harrison County in Marshall, Texas, and we know that he was at a nursing home. But then on this one, it says that he was in Harris County, Texas. That's where we start seeing some red flags whenever we're looking at these documents. And then we consider the notary. Jan Williams, our notary, she's actually based out of Houston, Texas. But meanwhile, this one was in Marshall. So then the question is, did our Houston, Texas notary actually travel to Marshall, Texas to get this item notarized? Then the next thing we've got that we see on occasion is forgery by family. And I would say probably one of the most common notions of forgery by family is where we have a senior and a junior. So we have two gentlemen with the same name, and there's some reason that the senior cannot execute it or will not execute it, but the junior goes ahead and signs on behalf of senior. That's still a forgery because you're misleading who's signing the document. But here, we've got something different happening on this one. So this one, number one, as we talked about, it's a quitclaim deed, and it is a fill in the blank form. So we kind of look at a couple things that's going on right here that gives us pause on this and requires us to dig a little bit deeper. The first thing I want you to note is the date of the quitclaim deed. If you can see that in here, and I apologize if you're not able to see my markers here, but you've got the quitclaim deed that is made on February 14th, 2007. But let's look up here on the top right-hand side and let's see when this deed was recorded. This was recorded in 2018. So typically, whenever a document is executed and then recorded much later, that I always like to try and find out why that happened, because there's usually something odd going on or there needs to be some sort of explanation in my mind. Now, again, this is by Jerry and Sandra Velade on February 14th, 2007. Just kind of looking in very closely here, noting that this is February 14th, 2007. And again, January 8th, 2018 was when this was recorded. There's another, let's look at this. The next page of this is all these items where it's being signed. You've got Dorothy Newsom who's signing it. Alijo Mendoza is witnessing it. You've got this notary who's signing it. And again, February 14th, 2007. Oh, but Jerry died in 2003. So we know that Jerry didn't sign that, and we confirm December 8th, 2003, his wife Sandra and Jerica were survivors of that. Notably, Sandra and Jerica are also people who are involved in this particular deed. And look, here's another one. We've got Jerry and Sandra who are executing this and are conveying the property to Jerica. And now this one's kind of interesting as well. Keeping in mind, this deed is dated June 20th, 2018. We know that Jerry had already been dead, but let's take a look over here on the far right, this recording date. Somehow, Sandra and Jerry were able to record a deed that was executed on June 20th, 2018. They were able to get that recorded on January 8th, 2018. I think these folks are running a time machine to be able to get some of this stuff done. So the next kind of a coercion we have is misrepresentation and trying to confuse you. So this is a case that I've worked on where we had this gentleman, Harvey Rumpel, who was given a deed to sign. So who knows what document it was that he was signing, because this last page is just this notary block. So we don't know what was actually there and what he signed. The other interesting thing about the way that this whole thing was drafted was that the notary wasn't clear on whose signature she was notarizing. Although it does have the jurat, which was we call this declaration for Harvey, um, we know that Harvey wasn't there whenever she signed it, based on her deposition. But what we do know is that what some of these other people were there when Angelique signed it. So there's just this confusion. Um, the other thing kind of to question about these items is the date of the deed. So here's another one that that was done by Bruno, our Harvey Bruno Rompel. What's interesting, let me go back a slide. What's interesting about this particular document, and this is where you start questioning things, um, we look and see who Angelique Boone was. She was an employee at a FedEx store. And at the time, we were able to look her up and saw that she worked at a FedEx store. And so she's saying that all of these people came in to sign it on April 16th, 2017. Let's kind of take, if you pull out a calendar and look to see when April 16th, 2017 was, you'd see that that was Easter Sunday. FedEx stores aren't open on Easter Sunday. And so we know that this document couldn't have been signed at that time. And here we kind of have another thing too, where there's this lack of clarity as to who's the one being to sign it or trying to sign it. And then again, note we have the same notary that is involved. But what is key here is you have two grantor, you've got a grantor and a grantee signing it and this notary block. So what actually happened in this situation is that this grantee, Angelina Galvan, she brought in this document with Alicia's signature already on it and had Angela notarize it. Of course, Angela just notarized it because she didn't know any better. So, one of the key takeaways from this is that you shouldn't be signing any documents in your home. You need to consider what it is that you are signing and think, is this the right place for me to be signing this? So if you're signing a legal document, you need to consider, shouldn't I be signing this in a lawyer's office? Is this something that needs to be signed in the title company's office? Where is the appropriate location for me to be signing this? And then also take into consideration what needs to be there. So for deeds to be recorded in the real property records, which is how you claim your interest in the property, you have to have, they need to be notarized. And you don't want to sign something where you could later on have a notary come in and fill in your signature, not realizing that that's what was going on. And like with here, we generally have the question of whose signature was actually notarized. So let's kind of talk about, what is the anatomy of a title fraud? So what are these fraudsters doing to be able to steal property and come up with these schemes? So the first thing is some sort of forgery or fake documents. So here we've got an affidavit of heirship for Beverly Bryant that was recorded in the real property records. We have a lady who's saying that she's Alicia Lewis and that she's familiar with Beverly Bryant's heirs in her life and is able to make an affidavit of heirship about Beverly, such that we can sell Beverly's property. The problem with this? Beverly is alive and well. But meanwhile, there's now a document in the real property record saying that she's dead. So they'll fake affidavits of heirship. They'll fake driver's licenses. And this one looks really good. It's very similar to a Colorado driver's license. But it's just there's some little pieces of it that aren't quite right. But this was good enough to get through a title company. And they saw it and they're like, okay, this is Rodolfo selling his property. So the next thing is they'll put together the sales transaction. And so this is where the fraudsters are going to get a contract to sell the property. So here, they have people who don't, Alicia Lewis as personal representative of the estate of Rosie Lee Lewis, the lady who we've seen that affidavit of heirship for, trying to sell the property. And of course, this buyer may or may not know what's happening. And then the next step is, and then we actually see this quite frequently, is there's a closing with a title company. And so here, again, with Beverly, this closed at a title company, and we know that because of this documentation on the top. So anytime you see that reference to a lawyer's title or you see a GF number, that's called a guarantee file. And so that is how the title company records, keeps their files straight, is they assign each one a number. So the importance of that closing out a title company is to give legitimacy to that transaction. It might not be the actual fraudulent transaction. Sometimes it is. But what's key is that the fraudsters, when they're posing as somebody else, they're going to be kind, they're probably going to be nice, and they're going to be able to get you to do things that you wouldn't normally want to do. Like, for instance, we had in one instance I've seen where we had the fraudster seller who was closing remotely. She claimed that she was in Puerto Rico having problems with her internet connection and bad weather there. And so she kept getting knocked off. And she was having problems getting through the verification questions of the online notary where she was confirming that it was her. She was so kind to the person at the title company that the title company just said, okay, you've shown me your ID. I believe that you are who you say you are. Let's just go ahead and move forward. She believed that there was a technical issue that was preventing her from verifying her identity, not that it was a fraud situation, which is exactly what happened. So now let's kind of talk about what can you do to protect yourself. We've already kind of shown you what these documents look like, what are some of the ways that they do it, but let's see what we can do to actually kind of fix this and walk through this. So the first thing is regularly check the real property records. And what does that mean? It means that every so often you're going to log in to Harris County's database and you're going to see who has title to your property. And so I'm going to break out of the PowerPoint slideshow for just a second, and let's go ahead and pull up the Harris County Clerk's website, and let me walk you through what it is that I'm talking about here. So give me 1 second. I'm going to share my screen again.
While she's doing that again, I just want to remind everybody, if you do have any questions, please include them in the chat.
All right, so let's go ahead. We're at the Harris County Clerk's office. Sure. All right, so y'all should see, just confirming, I have the screen up for the Harris County Clerk's office. Nia, is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay, perfect. So here I'm already logged in. Anyone can create an account with the Harris County Clerk's Office. You don't need an account to search, but you do need an account to look at documents. So I'm already logged in. So what we're going to do is go to Property Records, which is the third from the left, and we're going to click Real Property. And so now here's where we're in this search. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to type a name of a company, Birdwing Holdings. And we're going to search for Birdwing Holdings. And so now we see everything that has been on file for Birdwing Holdings. And let's kind of play with this date so we can do it. You can mess with the file date so you can see the first thing that you have. Or we can do the most important thing probably for us is going to be the last thing. But what we see is we see that this company, Birdwing, we see grantor, which is the person who sold it. And then we see the grantee, Birdwing Holdings and Birdwing on Broadway. And you see that this was a warranty deed and they got it. The file date was on October 11th, 2021. And if you go over to the right, you can click on the document and it will pull up whatever document was attached to that. So here it's a special warranty deed with vendor's lien. And then likewise, there's all these other documents that were filed relating to Birdwing as the grantee. So also, let's do this. If you want to see whether what, let's also check and see if Birdwing has sold that property. So here, what I've done is I've typed Birdwing into the grantor section, which I think is where you're one of the places where you're going to want to run your name or whoever owns the property. So here for Birdwing, we see that Birdwing is listed as a grantor on the deed of trust. So we know that that's correct because that's going to be the loan. And we see some assignments and whatnot on here. So this is how you're going to see what's happened with the property. All right, so now let's go ahead and kind of go back to our presentation. So the next thing we have up here is county clerk fraud alerts. Note, not all counties have this just yet. I cannot see where Harris County has this. However, if you happen to be located in Brazoria or Galveston County, they do have those. The next thing is be cautious with your personal information. We are now living in an age where we have so much of our data stored electronically. We have so much information in our, whether we know it or not, in our phones, in our passwords, in our emails, all of those types of things. And we rely on that electronic information daily. And likewise, there are people out there who are trying very hard to get that information. And this is where I think what needs to be paired with with a presentation like this is a presentation talking about digital security and cyber security. Because most of us, if you've got an email address, you need to be concerned. If you've got an email address, you need to be concerned about security. And now, even without that, there's questions about your personal information. There are people out there that are making phone calls telling you that you're late on your credit cards, and they can help you with that. And they say that they're from your credit card company, and they want you to give them your personal information. There's people out there that will call and say that you've got a problem with your computer and they need you to log on and do certain things and they can fix it for you. your credit card company typically isn't calling you like that. They're going to have more information where you can verify. The most important thing that you can always do whenever you're getting those calls is to say, thank you for the information. I will call back to the number that I have on my statement or is on my credit card. And then you initiate the call. The most important thing in terms of being vigilant is that you keep your personal information personal and you're not giving people any more information than they need. But likewise, you initiate the calls where you're giving personal information and verifying personal things. Now, the next thing, it may seem like an obvious one, but this is where we do see some issues, is paying your property taxes. Or at a minimum, some of you may be of the age where you've been able to do a deferral on your property taxes. What I mean here is you need to stay on top of that. If you are doing a deferral, you need to monitor that deferral and you need to understand how much is owed and pay attention to that. You cannot just say, I'm not worrying about property taxes anymore because I'm not paying them. You need to pay attention. Most recently, it was the payment of property taxes that actually alerted the owner of a fraudulent transaction. And in this situation, here's what happened. And this is actually out of that Colorado ID that I just showed you. So fraudsters impersonated the owners of the property and sold the property to somebody else. At closing, the title company paid the property taxes on the property from the prior year. So this was a closing that occurred in January. Taxes hadn't been paid for the prior year. About 2 or 3 days after closing, the real owners tried to pay their property taxes and saw that they had been paid already and quickly learned that this title company had paid their property taxes for them. They immediately contacted the title company, and I'll say this, they found out that the title company had paid them because they called the tax assessor collector and said, and just straight up asked the person, who paid my property taxes or who made the payment for this account? And they learned that it was this title company. The owners called the title company and said, and asked, why did you pay our property taxes? And that's when the fraud was discovered. Fortunately, there had been some issues with the wire, things were delayed. The title company was able to claw back almost all of the wires and almost all of the money from this fake sale. And as a result, everybody was able to be made whole, and the fraudsters weren't able to actually get away with something. So again, part of the issue with paying your property taxes is that you are keeping current on your account, that you see what's happening, and you are you're just paying attention. Because this is where, if you're not paying attention, things can you can miss that the property has been sold. And that's because the appraisal district will update who's receiving the tax statement. And again, it's just a matter of being current and being vigilant on things. Okay. The next thing is, and very importantly, is to draft a will. Make sure that you have your estate planning documents in order. I know that there are programs out there, like Houston Bar Association, Houston Volunteer Lawyers, and other organizations out there will do will-a-thons. And let's go ahead and get a will in place so that way you have it done and we know exactly what's going to happen to your property after you pass away. Additionally, kind of important to note is that after you draft your will, you don't have to hold on to that original. But what you can do is you can go ahead and send it to the Harris County Clerk. You let your family know that you have it, but you go ahead and put it on file with the clerk's office. And that's one thing that you can do to make sure that it doesn't get lost or doesn't get avoided. You can see that it is there and you know that your wishes will be honored. Another important thing that you can do is don't do a pocket deed or a desk deed. You remember earlier in this presentation, we were talking about those deeds that they were executed in 2007, but they weren't recorded until 2018. So do not say, I'm going to give my house to my son when I die, so I'm going to go ahead and draft the deed right now, and I'm just going to have it sitting around so he can record it later. No, don't do that. Do an actual estate plan, put it in your will, or the next step is consider a transfer on death deed or a ladybird deed. These deeds, they're different, two different types of vehicles, but what you are doing is you're recording a document that says, when I die, this is who's going to get my property automatically. The beauty of that is that it is putting the world on notice that this is what your intent is. You can still go back and revoke these, but the beauty of it is you've got something on file with your signature. You've got something that is setting forth, having to provide some sort of explanation for a change in plans if that's what you want to do. Now, the last piece is kind of, I've got this is supposed to be a sleazy realtor here, or a sleazy home buyer here, is don't sign agreements in your home. Um, I have had a couple potential clients come to me because they realized that somehow they signed a purchase and sale agreement where they agreed to sell their house to somebody else. And it's a low price, and they're just like, I don't know how I did this. I don't know. I don't really remember signing this, but that is my signature. I don't know how this happened. So again, the key here is don't sign it. Don't entertain these people that are coming to you and trying to buy your house or trying to do these things, or you have no obligation to be nice to these people. As I've actually told my mom, no is a complete sentence. You have no obligation to talk with them on the phone. You have no obligation to talk to them if they appear at your front door. You can simply shut the door. You can simply say goodbye and hang up the phone. And that's generally my recommendation on these things. Because if you want to sell your home, you should reach out to a realtor that you want to work with, not one that comes and knocks on your door. And again, if you need work done on your home, like you need a new roof, you may need replacement siding, the best contractor to work with isn't the one that's going to pop by your house and saying, hey, I'm in your area doing work. If you need to have something done, reach out and find a reputable contractor. Don't go with a sleazy person knocking on your door. Now, next, we have the issue is like, what is the recourse for this? What do you do if some of these things have happened to you? So the first thing is, with the title issues, I will say you need to retain a real estate lawyer. One of the most unfortunate things is that you're going to be out for the attorney's fees in order to get it cleared up, unless you do qualify for legal services. In most instances, it is going to require a lawsuit to clear up title. And there's a couple different mechanisms for that, but for the most part, if somebody has executed a deed pretending to be you, we're going to need a lawsuit to get that unwound. Additionally, it is important to report the fraud to the authorities. Report it to the county clerk's office, report it to local law enforcement, and report it to the attorney general and the district attorney. There have been instances where Harris County has investigated real estate fraud schemes and has actually, pressed charges against people relating to that. So it is important to do that. But one of the things that is incredibly important to note on all of this is time is of the essence. We need to make sure that we are getting these items cleared up as quickly as possible. We don't want multiple transactions to go through or multiple additional deeds to be filed because that just makes things more complicated whenever we clean it up in the future. It means that there's going to be more parties to the lawsuit. It means that things are going to be more complicated and more costly to fix. So at this time, that is the main crux of the presentation. I know I did have a few questions that were presented beforehand. And one of those dealt with title lock services. So Harris County and some of the surrounding counties, they don't necessarily have what we would call a title lock service. But what they do have is they can alert you whenever something is filed that would attach to your property. There are also, and I'm sure you've seen them, there are services like third-party services that will say that they're going to monitor your property and provide some sort of a title lock. Nobody can provide a title lock for you. And we've looked into some of these services in the last couple years. And the problem I have with these services is that number one, some of the counties are already doing this for free. And number two is that these services aren't preventing the fraud. All they're doing is notifying you of the fraud. So it's not as if you are like gaining anything. You're still in the same position that you were in the first place. You still have this issue that you need to clear up. And then most of these services don't provide any amount in legal fees relating to clear that up. And most of them, their liability, if they miss something, is limited to what you've paid them or about $250. So in my mind, those services are really just trying to make money off of fear. And with the simple knowledge, like right now, I've shown you what you need to do to check your deed in Harris County. If you can do that once every 6 months, you're better off, in my opinion, than having to deal with those services. And, if we need to kind of walk you through and like how to do that better and have a better handle on that, we can put something together for you on doing that. But I think that that's kind of the better way of handling it. So if anybody has any specific questions or general questions, happy to answer those. I know there have been some questions popping up in the chat.
There are quite a few questions in the chat.
Okay.
Oh, go ahead. I'm sorry.
Okay. So I'm just going to start with the ones from like start at the top and work my way down. Is that okay?
Yeah.
Okay.
And I'll read them out. But before we get too far ahead, I've gotten a couple of messages also about searching for their property records again. Can you go back to that screen and explain that one more time?
Yes,
How they search their own
absolutely.
records.
Absolutely. Give me 1 second. Let me get my computer pulled up. Um, Give me 1 second.
I also see there are quite a few questions in the chat that are not specifically related to fraud and title deed. We can, I don't want to get into too many specifics about things that are not related to title fraud.
Yeah.
So some of those questions we may not be able to address. If we do address them in other presentations, then I will let you guys know that.
So here's what we'll do. Let me show you where we are. So again, let me go to the homepage. We are at the Harris County Clerk's website. And so here you can just Google Harris County Clerk, and that's going to it should be the first thing that pops up. I'm using Bing, same difference. So you want to go to the Harris County Clerk's office. And one of those things that always kind of make sure of is whenever you are going to a website is that you are at the website that you think you are supposed to be at, especially if you are entering in any personal information. So meaning if you were to receive an email purportedly from your bank that says, hey, you've got an overdraft, click this link to fix it. Don't click the link, go to your bank's URL that you know, and then do it that way. Be very cautious about whenever you're going through emails or links from third parties. And again, that's all about being vigilant. So apologize if there's a little side note there. So what you're going to do is you're going to go to search records and you're going to go to property records and we're going to go to real property. I will admit it's been a little while. I live outside of Harris County, but nevertheless, let me go ahead and throw in my name as the grantor. And so here you are using last name and then first name, no punctuation. So let's put in my name, McGarvey Cassandra. Oh, what is funny is I'm realizing I've filed things on behalf of clients and more things are popping up than I thought. Um, so let's kind of scroll down where I'm looking for, actually, this is going to be the, like whenever I sold my own house. So my husband and I sold a property in Houston in um, 2012. And so here you see that warranty deed from my husband and I to Norma Renia. And so part of the reason why we're searching us as grantors is because that's how the property is going to come out of your name. Whenever we talk about title, we typically refer to this as the chain of title. And why we talk about it as a chain is because there has to be a link between every single transaction in there. So, for instance, so here, just kind of to walk this through, my husband and I sold the property to Norma Renia. In order for title to be complete, there needs to be a deed into my husband and I. So let's go ahead and I'm going to search my name as grantee. And here we have a warranty deed at the very bottom from Angela and Brent Shaw into my husband and me. And so that's how we see this as a chain of title. So if we go back, if I searched for Angela and Brent Shaw as grantee, we would see them purchasing the property from somebody else. And so this is going to go person after person. So the importance of this is looking to see where your name is and what's popping up with your name. Did anyone have any specific questions about this particular website and how you run the searches in Harris County?
Is the process the same regardless of the county? Because I know there's some people that are not in Harris County here.
Yes,
So
and
if
yes,
there is no register of deeds, where did they, or like a county clerk's office, where did they
it's
search?
so it's going to always be the county clerk's office. What county specifically are we looking at? And I can pull up just so we can show what that county looks like. So like for instance,
Brazoria,
Brazoria. Okay,
Brazoria.
okay, so here's Galveston County, and you're just going to go to search real property records. Again, what is interesting, give me 1 second. So here's Brazoria County, real property records. And a lot of these, you're going to have a registration. Like you're going to have a username and password for it. Um, the username and passwords are free. The only time I think for all of these that you need to pay anything to get the documents is if you want a certified copy of the document. If you are fine with an uncertified copy, which for our purposes today, that is perfectly fine, then you don't need it. And so here, let me log in. Here is Brazoria County's website, and it would be the same thing. So you would just search last name, first name as seller, and it would pop up. Here, it's actually pulling up people. Let me see. I guess it's not pulling up anything for this particular person. I'm just randomly searching names here. But in general, that's how you do it. It's the same basic concept for any jurisdiction.
Somebody asked about Fort Bend County.
Same thing.
Okay, let's go back to the questions in the chat. How can you correct a fraudulent deed when the grantor is deceased?
So with that, that goes to okay, let me make sure I'm understanding the question correctly. If we're talking about somebody impersonating the grantor. So if you have an interest in the property, then you have standing to file a lawsuit to correct the title to the property. And so that is what a trespass to try title or a suit to remove cloud on title does. The purpose of those lawsuits is to confirm who has title to the property, and it will invalidate that court order, and that judgment will invalidate that deed. And so ultimately, what will end up happening is we get an order from the court saying this is who has title to the property. And then that order gets recorded in the real property records, and that clears up, that court order clears up the chain of title. It cures the forgery, and it says, like, from here on out, this is where we are on that.
Okay. Okay, when it comes to transferring title to clearing title, we are having our inherited property and clearing title presentation that's scheduled for Thursday at 1 p.m. So that's going to be addressed there.
And all of those, like, Shamika, you're asking some really good questions. Like the other one, you're asking when the spouse is alive, how do you transfer title from joint to spouse only to clear title? That's one that we can dive into on Thursday. And sometimes the answer is just like it depends. Um, and hundreds of heirs, that's another issue. There are mechanisms to take care of that. But also, let me just kind of point out that is why, in my mind, it is so important to have a will, because it clears up who the owner of the property is, and it allows you to do things. Although the state of Texas has rules or a procedure for what happens, like who gets what whenever you die without a will, it gets cumbersome. And that's what happens whenever you have generations who have not used a will to transfer title to their property or to say who gets what in the property. And that is why it is so important that we take, after somebody passes away, that we take the steps necessary to clear that title. Because if we don't do it, like if it's not done then, it also makes it easier for there to be some sort of fraud or somebody coming in. And this is where you get the junior signing in place of the senior. This is where you get those deeds that we talked about where they purport to be dated, like they purport to be executed 20, 30, 40 years ago, but then they're just now filed. That's why by properly handling the estate administration and by transferring titles of property, you are able to work to discourage some of these fraudulent activities.
Okay. What will be
So
included in what I said? Okay.
Okay, and Shamika, you're asking about tax sales. So tax sales are the ultimate lien, meaning that they are the highest priority in terms of liens against the property. And so the only reason that a tax sale would be set aside is if the person who, like the true owner of the property, didn't actually have notice of the sale. So it's kind of an interesting question that you pose. But for the most part, provided that the true owner had notice, then the sale would be fine. And I wouldn't necessarily be scared to bid on any of that because you would be like you're still entitled to get your money back on that.
And we actually just had our presentation the last Thursday of property tax foreclosure and the sales and how they actually work. So that was actually a pretty good amount of detail that was explained there.
Okay. Do you mind if so Tonya asked if a grantor does not record a deed when a loan is paid and heirs have no documents to establish ownership, how then can they proceed? So this is you're asking kind of a multi-part question here, and there's a couple issues that are going through this. So first off, whenever you purchase property, you should be getting the deed immediately. It's just subject to the promissory note and the deed of trust, meaning you take title to the property, but you have this lien against it. If you're in a situation where, like what you're talking about, like taking what you say on face value, we're talking about what we would call a contract for deed, which is similar to a rent to own transaction. That is a completely different animal. And I always try and discourage anyone, buyers or sellers, from doing that type of transaction. So here, if we're talking about the release of the lien, the release of the deed of trust, there is basically it amounts to a breach of contract action. Then also some title companies will acknowledge that the lien should have been released if we are past the statute of limitations to enforce that lien. But there's kind of a lot going on in what you're talking about there, and a lot of it depends upon time.
Another question here. How many years can pass to void a fraudulent deed?
It depends upon what the issue is. So if you are dealing with, let's talk about like the forgery, like sometimes there's a 4-year statute of limitations on some of these things. However, if we are talking about a forged deed, we're looking at when do you have notice of that transaction? Because that forgery was never a valid deed from the get-go.
So can you elaborate a little bit? You said some things have a 4-year statute of
So
limitations. What does that mean?
if we're talking about a fraudulent deed where like for instance, a power of attorney has exceeded the scope of his authority and has sold property, that's going to be a 4-year statute of limitations, subject to what we call the discovery rule. Meaning, so whenever the person finds out about it, you've got 4 years to sue on it.
Gotcha. Okay. We'll answer questions about squatters. Was the state of Texas supposed to put something in place to prevent this from happening?
I I don't know the answer to that. In terms of was the state supposed to do something? I will say that various counties are taking steps to prevent this, or at a minimum, make cleaning it up better and easier. For instance, Harris County requires you to show ID anytime you record something in the real property records now. So for instance, like anytime you record something, the person who is going down to record it has to show their ID, and that information is documented. So that way the county knows precisely who is doing the recording of that document, such that if a document later turns out to be a forgery, we do have the precise information to know who it was that recorded it. Again, that assumes that the person recorded it with showed their ID, showed a genuine valid ID. Um, we also have the issue of a lot of like title companies. My office does it. There are um, services that allow you to electronically record documents. But again, those services are tracking who it is that is recording the documents. So, for instance, every time my office records something in the real property records, we use this third-party service called Simplifile. Simplifile knows that it is me who is recording it, or my office that is recording it, and that is the information that gets transmitted to the Harris County Clerk's office.
So nobody can just go and pay for a subscription that'll allow them to do electronically filing, just some random person.
You know what? I don't know. I don't know. I think you are, I believe that they limit it to title companies and attorneys. I'm pretty sure of that, but I cannot say that for 100%. I apologize.
Um, what do we need to do if we find out someone has committed fraud to take your property?
You need to talk to a real estate attorney, and we need to figure out what has happened, and we need to get a lawsuit on file. I mean, that's my utmost. Like, if you determine that you don't have title, that there's a fake deed, or there's something out there that is affecting your title to the property and you didn't sign it, first things first, we're going to file a lawsuit. And then the second thing is there's a document that we can record in the real property records that says there's a lawsuit that is pending that affects title to the property. And what happens there is that puts the world on notice that we have a lawsuit and that we are questioning some documents that are that are in the real property record, and tells people you can't rely on what's in the real property record until we get that sorted out.
So does that stop somebody from still filing some additional fraudulent documents? So say, for example, like you just gave, can another person then just go to the county clerk's office and file another document that would then sell the property to somebody else?
So, yes, they can. It does not stop future recordings, but here's what it does do. I talked a lot about how there are quite a few of these transactions that are taking place at title insurance companies, or excuse me, title companies, where these closings are occurring. Um, if a title company sees this document, which is called a lis pendens, in the real property records, I do not know of a title company that will close that transaction. And so
Right.
it does not stop anything from happening, but it does, number one, it discourages it. And then number two, if somebody does purchase it after you have that notice on file, they take the transaction, or they take the property subject to whatever claim you have on it. So they can't say, oh,
I didn't
well,
know.
I thought Joe had title to the property. I didn't know that you were claiming that you didn't sell it to Joe. Oopsies. No, they have, because you have that document in the real property records, they know that you have sued Joe and said, title is mine, not Joe's.
In other words, that we say multiple times, do not do any real estate transactions outside of a title company.
Yes. And I will say this as well. I have had I've had a couple people reach out to me and say, "Hey, I'm a mobile notary. I would like to do execute documents in your office." So for certain documents, sorry, I see you smiling, Neil. So for certain documents, especially like refinances of loans or home equity loans, They have to either be executed at a title company or in an attorney's office. And so, what these notaries are doing is they want to be able to say, oh, we're going to go to this attorney's office and you're going to sign the documents there. So, my recommendation as well is number one, you're not going to sign, do not sign documents in an attorney's office unless you know that attorney is your attorney. Um, and then also close it at a title company. If you are trying to, somebody wants to buy your property, you use your realtor. You use somebody that you trust. Don't go with a person knocking on the door. And again, go to the title company to execute the documents or go to your lawyer's office to execute the documents.
Next question here. Considering fraud, how does one know about a property that they didn't know existed until years after death and it is sold without permission? Is there a statute of limitations on that?
So this is actually something, this is part of what actually what I do. I do some work with title insurance companies and we work to clear title for insurance. And sometimes this is exactly what happens is that we have property that is sold and somebody does a fake affidavit of heirship, like meaning they deliberately omit children or you have a spouse who says, who tries to represent that that they inherited everything. So there's not a statute of limitations because your title vests immediately. That whenever that person passes away, it's subject to claims of the estate and whatnot, but you have title. And so there's never really a deadline for you to go back and try and claim your interest in the property. There are some what we call affirmative defenses that someone could raise. And one of those is what we call latches, which basically says you waited too long to do this. So it's those instances where there's not a bright line statute of limitations, but there's this issue of like, it's been 20 years and we've held title, you haven't done all of this. Um, Additionally, one of the things to note is in these instances, it also comes a bit of a business decision because at that point, the people who believe that they've had 100% ownership interest in the property, they've been paying all of the property taxes. They've been maintaining the property, they've been upkeeping the property, they may have made valuable improvements such that there really isn't an economic benefit for you to try and take any of that ownership interest or assert any of that ownership interest. But again, this is one of those reasons why it's so important to do estate administrations, is that way we know these are who the heirs of this person are, or like having a will. This is why it's so important to give certainty to these items. Um,
Um,
let me
Miss Jamie.
address
Hey, Jamie.
let me address
Uh,
Jamie's because you and I talked about this, Nia. So Jamie's question is this: if you have to go through the legal process to correct your title fraud, can the proper owner ask for the recovery of attorney's fees and expenses? So this is one like really frustrating situation for me. So the answer to that is generally no, and here's why. So the Texas and okay, so the Texas legislature allows you to recover attorney's fees in only a certain number of types of cases. Um, Trespass to try title, which is like this title lawsuit issue, is not one of those cases where you can get attorney's fees. However, there is a statute that says if you record a fraudulent document, then the person who is suing is entitled to recover their attorney's fees and like up to, I think, $10,000 in damages, something of that nature. So there is a bit of a mechanism for you to get that. But here's the unfortunate reality of it. Most times you don't know who the fraudster actually is. And so you end up, sometimes you do, sometimes you don't. Most times it's difficult. We can't actually pinpoint the fraudster because they're already gone and they're using fake identification anyway. And so by the time you're actually in the midst of the lawsuit, the defendant or the person that you're suing, more likely than not, is also a victim of the fraudster because they're the person who has purchased property that from the fraudster, not realizing that the fraudster didn't have title to the property. And so you have victim A suing victim B. And so in that situation, it's not really like victim B didn't do anything wrong. And that's why victim B is like, well, I closed out a title company. I did everything right. How did I end up in this situation? And so victim B, more likely than not, is covered because they closed out a title company and they purchased title insurance. And so they're going to have an attorney appointed for them that's going to help them with those issues, and they're going to be made whole. Unfortunately, victim A, the person who is the actual, like had the property stolen from them, even if they have title insurance, that title insurance policy does not apply because it only affects their title to the property, like looking backwards, meaning, is there someone that says they had title before you did? It doesn't affect something that gets recorded after you took title to the property. I think that's a long way of saying, yes, you could theoretically get a recovery of fees if you know who the fraudster is. But then again, a lot of these times you're not going to know who the fraudster is. And then at that point, you're going to be chasing your attorney's fees and you really just end up with a piece of paper.
Mm, mm, mm. Uh, going on down here. I paid off a property, but still see the bank as the grantee on the Harris County records. Do I need to remove this?
So the bank should have sent you a release of lien. And so if you're looking at this, I would look at you as search you as a grantee and see if there's a release that pops up. If you're not seeing that, then I would give the mortgage company a call and just tell them, hey, we've paid in full, but I'm not finding a copy of my release of lien. Can you please send me another copy?
Okay. And if they haven't recorded it, then what do? You request them to record it, or
You request that send them a written certified, like send them a letter, certified, like put in the mail, certified mail saying we paid this off, there's a zero balance, please record the release of lien. And then
um,
if they do not, then again, that is a lawsuit, it's a breach of contract. And then that one you could recover your attorney's fees on that.
okay.
Sorry, I feel
When a
like I'm
spouse is
advocating everybody to sue. I'm not at all.
when a spouse is deceased and a wife less than 10 years has no legal documentation stating and or showing rights to the property, how would the deceased person's parents get ownership rights?
I'm not
If I read
quite,
that correctly, I'm not following that question
I'm
either.
not following it. I will say this, it depends upon the nature of the property. There's a lot of like, it depends here. Is it community property? Is it separate property? Um, because like the spouse is going to have like community property or separate property, more likely than not, that wife is going to have some sort of interest, or wife slash surviving spouse is going to have some sort of interest in the property. But this here, if some of this is going to be again, it's an estate administration. So for something like this, depending upon the situation, um, I would suggest an application to determine heirship. And then also, it really depends upon the type of property. If this was community property, separate property, even if it's separate property but this was their homestead, that surviving spouse is going to have the ability to remain in the property. But if it is something where that interest does not go to the surviving spouse, I think that is one way where those parents need to make sure that they have that heirship has actually been determined. And so that in that situation, I would recommend filing an application to determine heirship.
But in something like that, where you've got a deceased spouse and the living spouse is still living, they can't then go back and just throw them out or put them out of the property when they've been living there.
Right, but yeah, correct. So there is whenever there is a homestead, meaning husband and wife are living in a property, it does not matter if that is separate property or community property. That spouse has what we call a constitutional homestead right, meaning the Texas Constitution says that a surviving spouse has the right to stay in a property. And just for clarity, just to make sure that we understand, separate property is property that is owned by one spouse and only one spouse. Community property is property that is considered, joint property by both husband and wife. It's not quite the same as like tenants in common or things where you own property 50-50, but it is more kind of it's closer to that. And whenever somebody dies and is married, the characterization of that property as separate property or community property determines who inherits if that person does not have a will. So in a situation like this, if you have a deceased spouse, a surviving spouse, and property that would be real property that would be inherited by the spouse's parents, then for the spouse's parents to protect their interest in the property, the best thing for them to do is to get that determination of heirship. So that way they can get that recorded in the real property records, because it's really easy for the surviving spouse to then get a affidavit of heirship and try and, make it seem as if the surviving spouse is the owner of the property um, by way of inheritance.
A side note real quick, I think it's just hilarious that we've had one of our previous partners that used to represent Department of Neighborhoods would always come on asking questions about if her husband passed and he remarries and marries Barbara, does Barbara get to live in my house for the rest of her life and what have you? And the fact that Barbara is asking a question about deceased spouse, it is absolutely hilarious to me. That's why I'm sitting here smiling to myself. So I just had to mention that.
And so Barbara, this is one of those things where depending upon where you are, like an application to determine heirship, it should not be that, or let me rephrase this. It should not be that expensive. Like we're not talking about tens of thousands of dollars, but just in our experience, what we typically do in our office, you would budget somewhere between probably $3,000 to $5,000 for that because of some of the things and research that has to be done, depending upon how complex it is. But depending upon where you are, income wise, you may qualify for services for that. And that is one of those things where those are easy things for volunteer attorneys to take.
Dallas County Clerk's Office has a program called Fraud Alert for your property. I was wondering, why would this be available in all counties in Texas?
Because they just haven't adopted it yet. I mean, it's one of those things like Harris County, for whatever reason, they seem to do their own thing. Like Harris County Appraisal District has their own search. Harris County Real Property Records has their own type of search. But in comparison, a lot of the and this is just anecdotal, a lot of the other counties, they have a standardized search engine that they use. So for instance, like if you're looking at the county, the appraisal district for Galveston County, Brazoria County, I think Waller County, probably even Liberty County, all of those are going to they're going to be identical, except for they're having the data from that particular county. So all of it's the look and feel, it's the exact same type of service. But meanwhile, Harris County does its own thing. I don't know why. You would think that it could be statewide. Unfortunately, it's not.
I
Can I
wanted to
address
add this
that?
too, since we're talking
Mia, can
about,
I address that real fast?
hey, Jamie,
Hey, can I
go ahead,
address that real fast?
Yes,
go right
please.
ahead. Introduce yourself.
Oh, do I have to? Okay. Hello, my name's Jamie Duong. I used to work for quite a while with an agency, county agency that handles property tax. We handle the estimation of the taxes and actually the collection of the taxes. So, to address Cassandra, this is what happened is because for us as the public, we're seeing it as I'm looking at who owns the property, I'm looking at how the taxes is assessed, and I'm looking at how the deed is recorded, and I'm looking at how it's appraised. To me, as a public, it's all government entities, right? However, on the backside of the office, these are different agencies. The appraisal district belongs to the state agency. Okay. And the collections office belongs to a one functional of the tax office. However, let's say if you go to certain school district, they have their own collection agency too. So what happens when you're like, hey, I'm going to the website, it should all flow seamlessly. Well, the reality is it makes too much sense.
Exactly.
Government's not going to make sense just to make your life not normal. Okay.
Yeah.
So each of these agencies, and then imagine this, each of these agencies may have their own IT department that handles how the information comes in. For example, at the tax office, back in the days, back when I was aware of it, every 5 o'clock in the morning, they have a system that downloads the data that was paid. Let's say you're making a payment online, it pays and it downloads the information and it gets plugged into the system. Okay. Whereas, let's say on the appraisal district, let's say the Harris Central Appraisal District, every quarterly they have a requirement that they shut the system down, like on a Saturday or on a late Sunday or something like that, and they upgrade their system or they run a disaster recovery, function for that. Okay. Now, school districts, I'm not too sure on some of the other ones, but the smaller taxing unit that have other tax assessor collector collecting their taxes, it's like you're having a kingdom of 8 different fiefs, eight different, uh, castles and noblemen that handle their own stuff. And this is how you're as a public, we're not seeing a seamless flow, on that.
I also kind of wanted to be on the advocation side of the employees at different clerk's office. It is they do get a bad rap. They take the brunt and the blame for a lot of fraudulent activity that goes on. But just know that the folks that work in these offices are doing their job. It is not necessarily for them to police if a document is accurate or not accurate, or real or not real. They have no clue. So the systems and things that aren't in place is the problem, not the folks that are actually at the front desk when you walk in to go file a document. So have a little bit of leniency when it comes to those county employees where those documents are being recorded. So I just wanted to make sure that people actually know that, or say something about that.
No, and
And
thank you.
I,
And that's just it. Like those county employees, like effectively, they are there. Their job is supposed to be to check the bare minimum, meaning does this comply with the Texas, like for a deed, does this comply with the Texas property code? Do we have a grantor? Do we have a grantee? And they don't even, I swear, they don't even sometimes check to make sure that there's a property description there. It's grantor, grantee. Is it signed and is it notarized? Like that's what they're looking for. And like sometimes you see it, sometimes they check for a property description, sometimes they don't. And and they're part of the reason why they're looking for that. Number one, they're looking for the notary making sure that it is properly notarized, but then also it has to do with the what we call the indexing. So they've got to properly code it as being like this person is the grantor. So that way, whenever we go to the search engine, we can type in that person is grantor and it'll pop up. But it is not their job to inquire, like, where was this document signed? When did the grantor, did the grantor actually sign this? Like, the notary on there is sufficient. That's all they are doing. It is the bare minimum.
Miss Lisa, is she still on? Did I see her? I was going to ask Miss Lisa with the Texas Legal Services Center. We're getting a lot of questions about ownership and spouses passing and things like that.
So
When there's
I threw into the chat the
oh,
Texas descent and distribution table, and this kind of walks through what happens when somebody passes away without a will. And I
okay,
know we've gotten a lot of questions about it. I know it's sort of aside. I can take it, and I will just kind of keep this very, very short. Is that if you're married and you die without a will, it really how your property gets distributed, it's determined whether or not you have kids from another relationship. And that's really how all of this boils down to it. And that's why, again, we go back to it is so important that you have a will, especially with today's blended families. It is not 100% where if I die, my spouse gets everything. If you have a second marriage and you have kids from that first marriage, your spouse in this second marriage isn't going to get all of your stuff. All of your property, your ownership interest, for the most part, is going to go to your children, not to your spouse.
okay. Um, I just want to kind of open it up again for the participants that are here. Do you all have any questions that you like for us to ask of the presenter? Texas is a community property state. To be in. Okay. This is about community property. When you got a couple that owns property, are they required to have a will in order to leave the spouse the property
No, but
if
again,
they don't have any children?
if they don't have any children, then any community property will be inherited by the surviving spouse.
But there's a process to actually get it in their
Ex
name. Well,
exactly. So that's where we get through this. Like again, it is so important to have even how to say this, even if you don't have sorry, this is why it is so important to have a will or to, at a minimum, have a plan by which you are going to determine who has the property or who's going to get your property. And again, here's the other kind of thing to think about in this is that a will, like it is cheaper or more economical. It is more economical to do an administration of a will than it is to do a determination of heirship and also an administration of the estate. And I say this because with a will, it is one attorney that you are having to employ to do this and walk this through the court. If you don't have a will and there has to be a determination of heirship, you then hire an attorney, you go to court, and then the court is going to appoint a second attorney to go out and search and determine who the heirs are. And so you can eliminate all of that if you just have a will. And that's why whenever there is the opportunity for the Willathon, take it. My plea to you is to take advantage of that. And again, do not, if you think, oh, well, I just own my house and it's not like, it's only worth this much, I don't have that much in assets, it does not matter. Go ahead and do this so that way you are saving your loved ones the headache in the future.
Okay, we're gonna address just a couple of more questions in regards to this, and I don't want to get too far off topic about title fraud and scams as we're getting into inheritance and wills and estate plans and things like that. And even though we know it's important and that's why you do it, but we had a participant to ask the question, and what about property that I have owned since 2014? I'm newly married 1 year and I want my adult children to inherit my home.
So if she acquired title to this in 2014, and then now she just recently married. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay, so that is going to be her separate property. So theoretically, the separate real property is going to be inherited by hang on, I'm double checking this. I always have to double check this. Um,
That's kind of why I didn't want to open up
exactly. So
that
decedent separate, married person with children are other decedents. So the children get all of that property. That surviving spouse has a 1/3 life estate, which I still don't. I'll say this: we've been doing this for a while. I don't even understand what this 1/3 life estate actually means because it's just confusing. But nevertheless, so your children would take it all. But here's where things do get confusing. If you have a mortgage on the property, and since you've been married this last year, since Texas is a community property state, if you've been paying in on the mortgage and the taxes, theoretically, your community estate could have a claim for reimbursement from your separate property estate. And so that's where things get a little bit confusing. Um, Most times where we've really seen this is that it sort of becomes a wash because there would be rent that you'd have to pay otherwise. But again, so as it comes to intestate succession, your adult children would get the property, but your husband would have the ability and more accurately, the right to continue living in the property after your death. If he moves out, then he abandons and loses some of that rights, but he still has the 1/3 life estate, but he would abandon his constitutional life estate.
and we Miss Lisa does go into that much detail about inherited property from spouses or non-spouses, children outside of marriage, and things of that nature. On Thursday's presentation, I did include the link in the chat for the inherited property clearing title and other probate concerns presentation that is scheduled for Thursday. In addition to that, we will be hosting a Todd clinic, a transfer on death deed clinic on Saturday. Well, participants who qualify will have the opportunity to have licensed practicing real estate and probate attorneys to actually review a transfer on death deed with them. We will have notaries available to notarize the document, and someone will be filing on site as well. So um, um, I'll include that information along with the registration for the Thursday's workshop in the email that I send out to everybody as well. Excellent presentation. Attorney McGarvey was very wonderful. All right, thank you very much. Are there any other questions? Yes, ma'am. Mhm. If foreclosed. Correct. Yeah, once it's foreclosed and it's sold, then the person who bought it actually bought all bills and taxes due and everything with it. Mm, correct. Correct. Okay. Hey, Miss Grace. Thank you very much for coming. All right. I just want to go down the excellent presentation. Thank you, Miss Barbara. A lot of great information. Thank you, Miss Lugo. If a TOD is in place and the parent leaves the house to the kid, but one parent is still alive, does half of the parent go to the parent and the other half to the kids? Oh, depends on how it's written. I see, I didn't see that you had responded to that already. Um, when should a TOD be notarized? TOD has to be notarized before a person passes. Okay, I think that's about it. No further questions of anybody else? Were there anything specific? Oh, there was another question. A desk deed or pocket? What is a pocket deed or desk deed?
It is a
Sorry.
deed. Oh, sorry. It is a deed that the grantor would execute and then literally put in his or her desk and just tell the grantee, hey, this is there. When I die, come and take the deed and just go record it.
Is that, how do they determine if that's valid or not? Or like, how do you, like, you just
It's a
got this
mess.
paper?
It's a mess
It's a mess.
because technically a deed, because here's an important thing to note. A deed does not have to be recorded to be valid. The importance of the recording of a deed is to put the world on notice of your title interest in the property.
Yeah, I wouldn't yeah.
Like, and so that's the whole point of this. And that's where we start whenever you have a deed, whenever you see a deed in like those cases, like we showed some of them, where you have deeds that were executed and then they were never recorded, it calls into question the legitimacy of the deed. And where I got some of these from, and admittedly, a lot of the presentation has come from actual cases. Actually, let me rephrase that. Everything within this presentation has come from an actual real life experience. These pocket deeds, and these were actually the Valade deeds. After mom died, sister went through mom's desk and found all of these deeds, or quite a few deeds. Some had been recorded, and I take that back. Some of them had already been recorded, but a lot of them, they were just sister grabbed them and then recorded them after mom's death. So we've got a couple problems there. Number one, we've got the issue of just the validity of the deeds themselves, because there was a lot there to question about the veracity and legitimacy of those deeds, the signatures, the notary block. It was a whole mess. But then here's the other piece of that, is that under the property code, in order to be effective, a deed has to be delivered. And so that means that if I wanted to convey property to Nia, I couldn't just execute a deed here at my desk and leave it here on my desk. I would actually have to give that deed to Nia so that way she had notice of it. So there's that delivery component. And so there's the question of if you just leave the deed in the desk, is that effective delivery?
So doesn't that open up the situation to be or to create fraud on somebody else? Because who's to know when it was actually placed in the desk or who actually did it? You know, who executed the document, right?
Yeah, all of the above. It's just a nightmare. That's the importance of, that's why I said, like, don't do that. Do a if you're going to do a deed and you're going to say, look, I want to give this to you after I pass away, then do a transfer on death deed, do a ladybird deed, do use one of those other mechanisms. Don't do the, hey, son, I've signed this deed. It's in the top drawer. Come get it when I die. Like, there's so many questions about that. Like, do it the right way.
Yeah, for sure. All right. Are there the transfer on death deed, that's a clinic where we're actually getting documents executed on Saturday. That yeah, that's on Saturday. That flyer is over there on the desk about that. Okay. All right. If there are no other questions, I see it is after 3 o'clock. I do want to be mindful of your time, Cassandra. We want to thank you all very much for joining us this afternoon. How long do you have to file the Todd after this? Oh, after Todd's been notarized, how long do you have to file it? Is there a particular date?
You just need to file it before death. But again, like your standard practice and procedure for any deed should be grantor signs it and it's notarized. That obviously is going to happen simultaneously because it has to be signed in front of the notary. And then immediately after it is notarized and signed, you should go ahead and file it. And so
I thought there was like a deadline or like a time limit before a Todd is actually considered to be valid. Like if you file it and you pass tomorrow, if you file it today, you pass tomorrow,
Nia,
is it still effective?
Nia,
Sam,
it's
do you know?
yeah, I think it's
yeah.
7 days.
Yeah,
7 days?
7 days,
there is,
yeah.
yeah, I don't
Okay.
remember,
7
but
days.
you are right. There is a certain, there is yes, you have, it has, there is a time limit, or like a survivor requirement. Um, but also it needs to be recorded before death.
Okay, and that was for you guys that don't know, that was Samantha Gooseman with Lone Star Legal Aid that was answering that question. I know she answered a couple of questions in the chat, so just so that you are aware that that is another professional that was answering that question. So not just a person that's just kind of chiming in. All right. With that being
Thank
said,
you.
I think that kind of,
That's a
I'm
good
sorry.
little, I said thank you. That's a good little tidbit. I had forgotten about the, the time period, like the survival requirement.
Okay. Well, we hope that you guys got the information that you needed today. Basically, we just wanted to make sure that people were aware about title fraud and these scams that are out there, what happens and how it actually works, and that you've kind of developed some kind of security measures or some kind of a thought process behind you making sure that you kind of keep track of and watch your property records and to see what's being filed without your knowledge. So thank y'all very much. If you do have any questions, please feel free to reach out to me and I can make sure that they get out to the attorney. We will, a representative from Lone Star Legal Aid will also be doing another one of these presentations in the fall. I believe we scheduled for like September or October. So we want to see if, you know, what the interest there is, if we want to continue to do this kind of a presentation, but we definitely wanted to make sure that we try to get as much information out about it as possible so people are aware and that they know that this kind of thing is happening. Unfortunately, it's been happening for quite some time. It's just people are just now kind of becoming a little bit more aware about it. So With that being said, we are going to wrap up for today. We thank you all very much for joining us this afternoon. Hopefully, we will see you on Thursday at our inherited property and clearing title and other probate concern on Thursday at 1 p.m. And also, again, our Todd Clinic that we have scheduled for Saturday. We do have a few more openings available if you guys want to sign up and participate in that as well. And I believe that is it. All right. Thank y'all very much for joining us. You all have a wonderful remainder of your day. Look for the email to come out of this recording. If you know of anyone, we do ask that you pay it forward, that you can share this with, and that may also find this information to be beneficial. Ultimately, we want you guys to have the conversations with your loved ones, your family members, your friends, and things of that nature that can use this information as well. So, all right. All right. Thank y'all very much. Thank you so much, Miss Cassandra. Thank you, Miss Barbara. We finally found Barbara. All right. Y'all have a good one.